Well, thank you everybody for lasting the whole day on what's so far the hottest day of the year. Apparently tomorrow it won't be the hottest day of the year because we've got a hotter one coming. But thank you for joining us for the closing session of the Social Mobility Commission Symposium 2026. And we hope you've had a really thought-provoking day, and we'll continue to share in the ideas and debates that you've had during the course of the panels. It's my honour now to introduce the Right Honourable Professor, the Lord David Blunkett, to give the closing address, and then we're going to do a short Q&A. So Lord Blunkett served as the MP for Sheffield, Brightside and Hillsborough for nearly 3 decades. Any of you who think you've had a long career so far, think again. He held key cabinet roles including Home Secretary, Secretary of State for Work and Pensions and Secretary of State for Education and Employment, and he now serves as a member of the House of Lords. Beyond Westminster, his influence remains profound. His 2022 landmark report on skills directly shaped the 2024 Labour Manifesto. Today, he continues to drive national progress as Professor Emeritus at the University of Sheffield, Chair of the University of Law, and a strategic advisor on major infrastructure projects. Please join me in welcoming a dedicated public servant and a champion of social mobility. Thank you.
Well, I echo what Alan said. Thanks for lasting. I've been to conferences where I've been the final speaker, and I've been very glad to shake hands with the 2 or 3 who have still been there. I had thought, on a hot day like this, I had thought I might wear a nice black T-shirt, but I discovered I hadn't got one. So you're with me. You've obviously not been watching Andy Burnham, have you? Look, you've had a long day, and you'll have heard very similar challenges to the ones that I'm laying out today. You'll have had biographies very similar to my own in terms of saying, and I will say it, that as a living example of social mobility, it's incredibly close to my heart. I mean, a kid born without sight on a council estate in North Sheffield, going to a residential school for the blind that didn't value academic prowess or anything else very much other than teaching us how to survive, which was a good skill, including riding 2-wheeler bikes around the grounds, learning the ropes at the local children's hospital as a consequence, mainly of roller skating and crazy things that children without sight are probably precluded from doing now. But it was a learning curve. So at 16, without any qualifications, went to night school, Alan, to further education, and got the qualifications eventually after 6 years to get to into Sheffield University. It was a hell of a long, hard haul. And one of the things I thought when I came into formal politics, firstly on Sheffield City Council and then in Parliament, was I didn't want youngsters with my background to have to struggle in the way I had. Not that it didn't teach me things, of course it did, but we don't set out to make kids struggle. We normally set out to liberate them. We normally set out to provide a trampoline or an escalator for them to get on and to find their way. And there are 2 parts of society, 2 very different strata, who suffer very badly. One is the extremely rich, whose children are entitled and don't have to do anything even to earn their living, and as we had back in the 18th century, as we have today, become entitled slobs. And the others, whose family setting, the people they're born to, the area they're born into, the conditions they experience, the lack of interest and aspiration, the ability to nurture and to develop, the lack of hope in terms of will things be better, which is what the SMC and all of what you're doing is about, and become completely disillusioned and disconnected and are prepared just to sit at home living on benefits. And that intergenerational disadvantage, because you can be very disadvantaged and you can be very cut off, but it's quite remarkable how offspring still seem to come, even if you claim you're lonely, and quite often, actually, as a way of overcoming loneliness, and then that's passed from one generation to another. And I say it as a social democrat because there's nothing worse than people who are reasonably well off and whose parents were reasonably well off patronising people who are poor. We don't need to, and we mustn't patronise and paternalise. We should be there alongside, supporting and changing. So, of course, where you live, how you live, who your parents are, what the income is, what start in life did you get is going to be transformational. And anything we can do to join up government at every level to actually be able to do something about it and link out into the voluntary and community sector, into the strength of community to make that happen, has got to be a good thing. But it can't happen unless it is joined up. So when people talk about Sure Start, of which I'm incredibly proud that the late Tessa Jown and I were responsible for putting together and promoting and driving through in the early part of the Blair government, we actually didn't simply see it, although many of people around us did, as a childcare operation or a better way of delivering health visitor support, although when it was first judged by Durham University researchers, they were more interested in the increase in breastfeeding than they were in the liberation of people within their neighbourhood and the life chances that came with it. I don't blame them because the department weren't all that with it in terms of reference. So you have to go to the Institute for Fiscal Studies longitudinal study released a year ago to actually find out what Sure Start meant. It meant a complete transformation of the lives of those who experienced the early local Sure Start programs, not the diluted version years later, or the family hubs that have succeeded them, but the intensive, collaborative Sure Start programs that actually use the talent and the social capital of people in the neighbourhood rather than coming in and just doing it to them. So my first recommendation is that we reinvent Sure Start, never mind Best Start, which I'm supporting. I'm a supporter of Andrea Ledson's initiative, and now Jess, Tessa Jowell's daughter. There's all sorts of initiatives paddling in this pool. My intention, what's left of my political life, is to try and get people to actually collaborate and do these things together. And I'm sure Best Start is a good foundation on which to build, but it isn't Sure Start. And the family hubs aren't Sure Start. Sure Start was a communitarian project, which actually did bring in the professional expertise needed, but as a corollary, as a support to what was happening in people's lives. And the greatest strength I got from it was going back to Sure Start programs and meeting parents who told me that not only had it changed the life chances of their offspring, but of theirs. They'd decided, if my child can now be expected to get a good job or to go to university or get a really good apprenticeship, I will. I'm going to have a go. So it was transformational in the lives of people, which then, of course, had a knock-on effect in breaking the intergenerational cycle. So if the one thing a new Prime Minister can do, it's bring about hope. It's bring about a sense of direction, of momentum in its best sense, to re-energize all of us. The inertia that exists at the moment throughout the systems that I come across is palpable. So an electric shock that says, stop the miserableness, they can't do, everything's broken. Actually, listen to the speech of a Conservative peer, Michael Bates, Lord Bates, from last week. It's worth just searching it out. It was a debate around the Joe Cox Foundation. What an absolute litany of great success of our country he put together. And I dropped him a line. because somehow we've got to start believing that we can do it, that we can change things for the better. Of course, all the things you've heard about today will make a difference. A decent house that's not got water running down the walls, the possibility of a playground that's not got needles in it, the way in which books are available from the very earliest years of the child's life, the way in which we can use technology to support and help parents with parenting so that they can actually tab in and talk to each other and learn from what works best. And we all need it. I wish I had it when I was first a parent. You learn as a parent as you go along, and the child is the experimental guinea pig. It's a terrible thing. I mean, by the time we got to a third child, you don't get 3 children very often these days. I'll come to that in a minute. When I got to the third child, I had some idea how to nurture and look after him and do my bit better with my then wife. So, you know, we've got to start thinking about how do we make that possible. And all of it about role models, about the inspirational that we can bring into people's lives. The other thing that I was really proud of was self-evidently the beginnings of a major transformation that I was building on what came before. You always do. Gillian Shepherd was my predecessor, conservative of the old school. We got on great. I was able to build on what she'd done, and others built on what I did. But the transformation of, firstly, early years in terms of nursery education. One of the first projects I ever went to with Tony Blair was a new nursery. Actually, it was an experience, one I've never forgotten, because I sat on one of these very tiny stools. You'll have been in nurseries as uncles, aunts, parents, whatever, teachers, and you sit there and your knees are under your chin. And I was only just really learning how not to be a pompous Secretary of State. Took me a long time. And I said I put my arm out around the person next to me and I said, "How old are you, my dear?" 23, she said. It was a nursery nurse. And later as Home Secretary, I was vehemently involved with avoiding sexual abuse. So I might actually have been caught up myself. I thought I was being a nice, friendly adult. These days, you've got to be very careful about that, whether it's a 23-year-old or not. But it was the first major new project that we've been able to commemorate. And then the primary and, in the future, the secondary and the reopening of access to higher education. All of it was about opening up opportunity that had previously been confined not to the very few. Those were the days of the 50s and 60s and the days when I went to university at the end of the 60s, where only 8% of the cohort of 18, 19-year-olds actually had that opportunity. But actually a very large cohort of people who were excluded from opportunity because of their background and their educational learning opportunity. And the third bit was to try and open up, we're still miles off it, aren't we, Alan? Lifelong learning. That whatever happens in those early years, you can still transform your life. You can turn it round through lifelong learning. All kinds of opportunities that people don't know about. So a major drive for careers, the right careers in schools that give people the right opportunity, but careers in life as well, to actually say, come back in and learn like Sure Start. Maybe you actually go to the same classes sometimes as your children. Schools don't like it, but I love the idea of parents learning alongside their children, as long as they're not left to struggle. So, what else? Well, a major part of our challenge is not only social capital, but actually real physical capital. If your uncle and aunt, if your grandparents own a house in London or the South East, it's almost like winning the pools if they leave it to you. Or, sorry, it's winning the lottery, winning anything. Sorry, the pools are way out of date. God, I'm old. I never won the pools and I don't win the lottery. But it's a massive boost to your life chances. It gives you a leg up. So back 25 years ago, we initiated from the Department of Education and Employment. It was a big department, so it had clout. It had clout with the Treasury. It had resources that we could interchange, that we could find. We could find a number of millions of pounds pretty easily. We found 100 million for the first phase of Sure Start, when the Treasury had not given us, through the service level agreement, the money. It was one of those seminal moments when the civil service thought that their end was nigh because they hadn't sorted it behind the scenes. And it was one of those moments where I didn't have a tantrum. I didn't throw my very old mobile phone that I've still got with buttons on. I actually said, I'm giving you a fortnight to go right through the books of every subset of the department, and I want you to find it. And they did. And there's millions sloshing about, even though we're up against it. And we could find the money. So what we did was we set up this research, and we said we want to know what the real factors are in terms of the difference that capital makes. Not just a house, but income, savings, shareholdings, etc. And they came back with the etc. The etc. wasn't just the physical well-being, it was the aspiration. It was the understanding of education. It was the connectivity. You could even connect the voting habits of parents, not which way they voted, but the fact that they voted, with the life chances of the children. And given that 40% of the population didn't vote in the last general election, that's a fairly big cohort that we need to be going at. It was an indicator. It wasn't a cause, it was an indicator. And so we decided, with Gordon Brown and his support, to set up the Child Trust Fund, so that at 18, a young person would have a nest egg. It wasn't big enough. I wanted Gordon to double or treble it, but it was a start. And youngsters with a disability got more, and the intention was that those identified as being on free school meals and in poverty would get more as well, and we'd encourage parents and church groups and clubs to contribute. And of course it was abolished in 2011. But again, the evidence is very clear. If you give a youngster, and it was only entitled for payment towards education training or a deposit, you give them that start in life and they have some hope of being able to make it work for them. They might even become an entrepreneur. They might, in the old-fashioned way, buy a barrow and buy some fruit and get down the market and sell it. It would be a bit different now, wouldn't it? It'd be get a decent computer and get out there on the internet. But whatever. And I'm really sad that it was abolished, because it was a stepping stone. It was a little contributor to this collage that we need to build of opportunity. But here's, before I finish, here's the difficult bit. And you won't like it. I believe that there has to be a complete transformation of the welfare state. I don't believe it's right to give people money to stay at home. I don't think it helps those with mental health problems to say, instead of we're going to actually work with you to connect you to a voluntary placement or a training place or the beginnings of a job, even if it's only part-time, instead of we're going to put the money behind you to do it, we're going to pay you to stay at home. We're going to say, we're going to give you pills or even talking therapies. The best talking therapies I ever had was talking at work. Talking to people who'd also got a job, learning about their family, what they were doing at the weekend, wishing sometimes I was doing it with them. But it was about lifting my horizons and aspirations. Now, I'm not saying because I could do it, other people can do it in the same way. I keep nipping myself and remembering what it was like and what a struggle it was, and how after my dad was killed in a works accident when I was 12. My mum had the most incredible struggle and needed support that she didn't get. So where it's needed, we have to give it. But you know what? I'd have preferred Rachel Reeves. I was a real odd one out here. I had these discussions with Save the Children, the Children's Society, and many others. I was an odd one out. I wanted Rachel Reeves to raise £3.5 billion to tackle poverty, but I didn't want her to give it simply because people had more than 2 children. 3,500 per child, not in terms of allowing people to go on training courses to get the childcare they needed, but because they've got more than 2 children and weren't working and were receiving the health component of universal credit, seemed to me to be getting it the wrong way around. So I do sincerely believe we need a hand up, not a hand out. We do need that escalator, but we need to help people get on it. And of course, a very quick way of solving child poverty, if the parents invest the money in the child, is to give them money. But it's not enough. It might be sufficient for a moment, but it doesn't overcome the crisis in their lives. So why have we got 1 million NEETs? Why is it such a really good idea that Alan Milburn is doing this project? Brilliant piece of communication the other week in terms of the analysis, the diagnosis of the problem. Hopefully a really good package of measures in the autumn that I hope the new Prime Minister will pick up, and I hope that Pat McFadden will be there at Work and Pensions to drive it through, because I've had long conversations with him about this. It's a crisis that's been building for a decade. People have ignored it until the last few months, and at last we're talking about a generation who need us to be alongside them, like one teacher at my school who came down week after week to evening classes so I could get O-level physics, so that I could build up gradually at evening class those O-levels and then the A-levels. Free, didn't get rewarded except when he couldn't see it, which was my obituary for him in The Guardian. A man who'd exercised his right, his support to make a difference to my life, and I've never forgotten him. And each and every one of us can do that. We don't need government all the time to do it for us. We need them to be there alongside. We need them to devolve and delegate and put the resource in. We need them to have joined up departments and policies. We need task forces, not commissions. But we need to do it ourselves as well. And I'm sure you're doing it day in, day out. And I try and do it as well. I think I've just got the bell. Somebody's nodded off and they've dropped something. I think it's my moment to say thanks for listening.
One more thought, David. This chair's here, just behind you. Just come back to your right a little bit.
This is Alan having his duty.
And you'll find.
Yeah, very good. That's like golden shot.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
David, thank you very much indeed. We've got a little bit of time for some question and answer. I might just start us off while people are thinking about their questions. We want just about the Milburn Review, and the Milburn and Tim's frameworks are both being developed currently.
Yeah.
So they have, I think, shifted the debate dramatically. Are they fast enough? Are they radical enough?
Well,
what more can be done?
Nothing is fast enough. I know it's ridiculous to say so, but when the civil service used to come and say to me, we can produce you a report on this, a paper in 6 weeks, I used to say 3 weeks. When they said, we think we can implement this in 6 months, we used to say 3 months. The New Deal for the Young and Employed, from a standing start in May 1997, had major pilot programs up and running by January of the following year, and the whole program nationwide by April 1998. It can be done. It is possible to do it. We need collective memory, and we need new ways of delivering. You can't go back to the New Deal for the young and employed, but my God, you can learn from it. Stephen Green, who was the chair of the National Citizen Service, who I was working with then and I've worked with since, he and I used money that wasn't government money after the NCS was changed to actually just invest in nearly 500 youngsters going on programs for 9 months, paid the national living wage to see if we could, with the voluntary sector, come up with an exemplary program, UK Year of Service, we called it. We've run out of money. We didn't set it up as a charity that was raising money. We were spending what we got as a hope that they could pick it up as part of the menu. 84% success rate in terms of jobs or going on to full-time education. We can do it.
Excellent, thank you. Questions from the floor? There must be many. We'll take Robert first and the question at the back.
Thank you. Robert Helf on Make UK. The Centre for Social Justice said that 700,000 graduates were, in essence, NEETs and on benefits. What would you do to change the university system, and would you move towards more people doing apprenticeships as opposed to traditional academic degrees?
Well, Robert is a living example of driving that forward, and you did a great job both as a minister and as chair of the select committee. And again, why don't we just learn from the work you were engaged in and scale it up rather than every time having to reinvent the wheel? So there's a lot we can learn from what you did. I'm a great believer that higher education opportunity and apprenticeship development can go hand in hand. Most universities now are actually offering graduate apprenticeships anyway. Most universities are offering vocational courses. They don't call them that, but engineering is a vocational course. Medicine is a vocational course. So we need to join them up, and we need to ensure that it's the right thing for the right person. So the city of Sheffield, my city, was built on apprenticeships. It wasn't just that they had a great grounding in the particular skill. It was also that they were mentored by the people who were overseeing their apprenticeship. It was a stability that made them worthwhile as a boyfriend, frankly, because they were going somewhere and they had something about them. And it gave them a belief in themselves that could carry them into all kinds of different directions when they completed. The apprenticeships were too long, far too long, and too often used as an alternative for actually employing at a decent wage. But taken together with the right careers advice, it's got to be the right thing. Pushing a youngster into university place when they're not academic or they're not on an engineering or medical degree and they don't like it and they don't want to do it is crazy. But excluding them because the background of the parents or the community they live in have not experienced higher education is equally silly. So we've got to ensure, and this is really tricky for social mobility, because nobody wants social mobility downwards, do they? You know, the families who historically went to university, when I went to university, from schools, colleges that traditionally sent people to university, tend to want to send their children to university. So I want those who have had that experience to want their child to do an apprenticeship, and I want those who've never dreamt of going to university to have the opportunity to do so.
Thank you. I do think some of that's changing. Watch out for the multiversity in Blackpool, because it's combining the degree apprenticeship route with the traditional route, and we think that is
getting colleges and universities
absolutely
together.
Absolutely.
I gave the example of South Bank in the skills report from 2022, but there are now lots of examples of this. And by the way, the universities, I did say this at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and I don't think the Vice-Chancellor of Sheffield is too pleased with me, that actually universities need a really good shake-up. At the moment, they're cutting, rather than thinking, how can we expand in entirely new ways? What are we teaching our youngsters that will equip them for the future? We need a really good shake-up.
Thank you. Question at the back.
Hi, Lord Blunkett. Cast your mind back, and you didn't mention this, but you, along with the now sadly late Graham Lane, set up the education maintenance allowance trials that subsequently came back. Now, bearing in mind they still exist and run in Northern Ireland and Scotland, do you think there's a role for this sort of incentive to be brought in again to adjust to the NEETs issue?
Yeah, yes, I do. I think that for the 16 to 19-year-olds, people forget in London about transport outside. There's half of England where there isn't free transport for youngsters all the way through their educational life. There isn't an easy way of providing youngsters from really deprived backgrounds with the equipment that they need, and that's what EMAs did. However, seeing I gave credit to the IFS for their work on mapping Sure Start, they did some work that they didn't like EMAs. They said it hadn't made a material difference. I've had a massive row with them before Paul Johnson moved on about this, because their methodology I thought was completely flawed. What they thought was that it was quite a good idea for kids from very deprived backgrounds to leave school at 16, because they were more likely, if they got a job, to actually move quickly through it and they wouldn't have debt. Well, the flaw in that argument was that the 16-year-olds aren't getting work, you know, part-time now, because they're supposed to be continuing learning. So actually linking the job, the apprenticeship, the possibility of further learning together is what we really need.
Great, thank you, David. Any more questions? Yes. I'll just take the mic over.
Abigail McKnight from LSE. One of the challenges with early intervention programmes like Sure Start is that they're costly. But it takes a long time before you can get good evaluation evidence on their impact, which makes them very vulnerable to being cut by another government coming in, different political party. Yeah. How do you take the politics out of those early intervention investments so that they're not just removed by or cut early in terms of expenditure, or replaced with something completely different by a new government? Have you had any thoughts about that?
No, I have thought about it. I don't think you can. I mean, I've looked back and thought, how could we have embedded that early policy more thoroughly so that it was less vulnerable to being part of the austerity measures? How could we have done that better? Partly the massive dilution of it as it expanded. Gordon wanted 3,000 children's centres across the country. If you get obsessed with numerical targets, then you might actually lose the plot. And I think by the time Sure Start was actually really finished in 2011, quite a lot, not all, but quite a lot of the projects weren't like the original Sure Start. But those that were, there was a massive battle with parents trying to keep them and communities really valuing them. And some still have the sign outside. You know, if I go to places and they've still got the sign, I ask them to take a photo with it there. So embedding is the only answer I can give you, that people start to own it, feel it, want it, and will fight for it. And that's what we've developed since 1948 with the National Health Service, with all its flaws. And the truth is that politics means that some things come, some things go. And I'd love us, for instance, this is nothing to do with today, I'd love us to be able to reach out, because I still believe there will be two major parties at the next general election. I'm an odd one out on this one as well. But I'd like to reach out with the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats to actually say, could we reach an agreement on how we're going to progress on social care? If we could get something like that for early years, then we'd be on a real winner.
Thank you, David. Next question. I'd like to go next. Yes, this gentleman at the back.
Thank you, Lord Blunkett, for that keynote speech. One of the things that I think became apparent earlier on in the conference, and I'm just thinking about now, is the political instability around the positions of Secretaries of State in government. We've had about 11 Secretaries of State for Education in the last decade. God knows how many work and pension secretaries. If a school was in this situation, it would get put into special measures in terms of head teacher numbers and retention. Is there a need now to have a consistent set of ministers in these departments to make sure we can get the feet under the table and get some policies out there? Because we're talking about a generation of students who have been left behind here. If that's happening over decades, maybe we need someone to come into a government department and have a full 5 years in Parliament to get this right.
There is a desperate need for continuity. The great advances in Scandinavia has been not just because in several decades they had stability of the political scene, but also between the political parties. I would describe many of the parties in Scandinavia as being small s social democrat, and they did continue policies. They may have tweaked them, they may have had a different view about resourcing, but they were very similar continuation policy, which we've not had. Now, if you can't get continuity from one Secretary of State, one minister to another within a party of the same ilk, then you're in real trouble, and that happens. So that means you've got to have a government policy, not the whim of an individual. It's damned hard, because I wanted a legacy, and I had particular things that I wanted to drive through and to be remembered for, but it's only any good if it's actually signed up by both the Prime Minister and your colleagues as being a government, not a Blunkett policy. And although that might cut my ego down a bit, it would have carried some things through a lot better. And it doesn't happen. Now, I don't mean it can't ever happen, it's just very, very difficult. And of course, we're in the middle of another churn, and so it's hard to say, believe me, there's going to be some stability, because why would you, when somebody said to me this morning, do you think it's going to be stable? I said, this is terribly corny, by the way. I said, the stable door has opened and the horse has bolted. So I'm not sure how we build in complete stability. What we can build in is continuity, and if we could just get that, we'd be on a winner. I'm afraid that won't happen if at the next general election there is an absolute massive upheaval and a party that's never been in government comes into government.
Thank you. Person at the back.
Thank you. Lord Blunkett, it's really fascinating to hear from you today. I was wondering, my mind is drifting back to Youth Connections days in the early 2000s, and I wondered if there are any elements of Youth Connections that you think could be quickly dusted off and put back in place to
the connections. The connections were, I mean, it was spelt differently with an X, but we put £500 million into connections. Some of the projects worked very well. They had the connectivity. Do you know there's a terrible word that's used only by people in the upper echelons of government and media, and I'm afraid some of the professions in London. I've never come across it in Sheffield ever. It's agency. When you talk about agency in Sheffield, they think of a state agency. But connectivity, engagement, and that was what Connections was about. It was in the name, and it was a holistic approach to working with young people across different elements of their lives. And we need to look back, pick out what worked best, and then reinvent it, because we so often think we're doing something entirely new and it's already been tried, but there is no collective memory. There's not even files in the department that they can draw down on. So I'll give you an example. The Department for Housing, Communities and Local Government put a written statement out on the 21st of May, just before the spring bank. Government tend to pile these written statements out, don't they, Robert, just before breaks. And there was a couple of mentions in that written statement of We will consult in the autumn and we will act next year. Well, my first instinct was, why not consult now and act in the autumn? But my second was, actually, one of these things they were consulting on was to learn about how to engage people in the Pride in Place programs. Well, we've had community development programs for the last 60 years. We had New Deal for Communities. We had guide communities where, you know, one community group could help another. They didn't need PwC or EY to do it. And we put the money in to help them help the others. We know what needs to be done. We need to dust it off the shelves. And you just get some continuity inside the civil service, and then to get promoted, they have to go somewhere else. You've got musical chairs. So the system is dysfunctional. Whether Andy will be, my good friend Andy will be able to do anything about it fast enough in the next 2 years, I don't know.
Thank you. Let's do one last question before we wrap up. No? Yes, go on then. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing all what you shared. I guess, I don't know if it's a question or observation, but the UK economy, a lot of the industries have been sold off. And I was wondering, I guess, in terms of, is there still the opportunities as there was many decades ago?
No, not traditionally, there isn't, but there are new ones. And it will take us to be alongside and navigate them with people. We can't do what Trump thought he could do and bring car production back from Mexico. But what we can do is to say, what are we good at? What are we actually doing well at? And how can we engage the generation we've been talking about to believe that that's the way forward? There's a whole new formula of manufacturing that isn't traditional manufacturing. We will need people who can control robots to do jobs that are currently done. Well, I'll give you an example. When I had a heart attack 2 years ago, I had some treatment in intensive care in Italy, but when I came back to Sheffield and went to the Northern General Hospital, they were putting stents in, and they were laughing and joking with me because I said, well, how brilliantly this had developed over the years. And they said, well, now, you know, it's just like plumbing. And they meant it. It's just like plumbing. And I was thinking, you know how we keep getting candidates in by-elections who are plumbers? Well, we're going to have robots in future, because if it's just like plumbing to put a stent through and up and into your main arteries, we're going to be able to do the plumbing with a robot, but somebody is going to have to control it. So we're going to have to equip people for entirely new skills, and we can do it, but we've got to inspire them to think of that rather than say, there's no job for me. When I went to the Newcastle College group back in 2022, when we were producing this paper, we went to the college group in the morning, and we met youngsters who said, it's absolutely hopeless. There are no jobs around here. And then we went to meet a round table of employers in the afternoon who couldn't get the youngsters to apply for the jobs. And somehow we've got to change the whole way in which we think, and we've got to join it up, and we've got to actually physically show these young people what can happen. And that can be from the age of 12 or 13 upwards, not from 16. And once people get that idea, that will bring them alive. They'll be as inspired as my third son was when he was on the Formula One schools program and learnt about manufacturing 15 miles away for parts for high performance cars. And he now is working for a company that demonstrate high performance cars.
Lord Blunkett, thank you very much for what I think has been a really optimistic upbeat. I think the thing I'm going to take away is we have to remember that we have to believe that we could solve these problems.
Yeah.
So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Good boy.
If I can just do a few final thank yous then, while we're getting Barley ready. Thank you first of all to all the speakers and panel members who took the time to come and discuss the issues with us today. We've had some really interesting discussions on some very important topics. A big thank you to the Social Mobility team. This has taken months of planning. They've worked incredibly hard. I think they've excelled themselves in every respect. They've achieved exactly what we wanted to do, which was air the issue around NEET and invite debate and discussion, because without that, we are going to do nothing. Thank you all for coming, for interacting and contributing your thoughts, and again, helping to shape potential solutions for the future. We've added a QR code to the screen, and we'd appreciate it if you could all complete an evaluation form that will help us improve the events in further years. Thank you for your time and energy and commitment. Thank you to my fellow commissioners, who are still here, they've been here during the day, for all their support. Final thank you again to David, and also to Barley, without whom none of this would be possible.
Very good. I better walk off with you, Alan.
Yes, right. So for the rest of you, we're going to walk off, but if you proceed to the tavern room for networking, there are drinks and something called nibbles, which apparently you can join in. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alan. Right.
I lead the way.
Let's go.
You need to hold
I'll
on
take
to
your left elbow.
Okay, left elbow.